people told me that they just want to avoid communication with or keep distance with the regulators so that the regulators will never find them. And I think it's very wrong, And when you really have a crisis or really face a law violation, possible law violation, do you think it's a more when the FDA impose a penalty on a stranger, do you think it's more serious or imposed on a person who is more familiar with? So I would tell them exchange the knowledge with a regulator, let them know your products, know your brand, and then it will be it's more safer than you just avoid talking to them. Sometimes you avoid talking to them just to make your regulators more worried about you.
Welcome to the Trade Winds Dispatch. I'm Will Watts, President of W Global Innovation. Today, I sat down with Edison Tang, President of Food Coordinate Consulting. Edison is one of the smartest people that I know when it comes to navigating the regulatory space for food, beverage, cosmetics, and healthcare companies in China. The conversation ranged from the macro, how's the overall market for those companies, all the way to the tactical, how those companies can navigate the regulatory space and work with government regulators. Now, I like to be upfront and say that I do have a relationship with Food Coordinate Consulting as an advisor. So with that disclosure out of the way, please enjoy my wide-ranging conversation with Edison Tang, President of Food Coordinate Consulting. Thank you for being online with us. I believe it's past 10 o'clock at night in Shanghai. So even that much more appreciation for you getting on with me and sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, well, thank you. Time difference is a very conventional thing to me when I serve the international clients.
Yep, I know it all too well. When you work in international business, international commerce, it's just part of the job, right? It's nights are never normal, and you got to get used to early mornings sometimes. But again, thank you. This is a conversation that I've wanted to have with you for quite some time. Of course, we know each other well. We've worked in the past together. We have many professional contacts in common, but I always learn so much when I talk to you. And I also thought that an audience would also appreciate hearing what you have to say, not just people who are contemplating entering the China market, but even those who are already in the China market. Speaking to you today reminds me of several years ago when I hosted a panel for the American Chamber in Shanghai that included you. And I think you were one of the standouts from that panel. I remember in the Q&A session, we basically just had to cut people off because there were so many people from the audience. And these are business leaders who had been in China for a long time, just asking you questions. And you were providing clarity on some points of Chinese regulation that I know had really been difficult and complex for many companies to navigate. So that's why I'm excited to talk to you today. And I think the audience is starting to get a lot of value out of this conversation. Before we get into the current regulatory environment in China and how companies, especially foreign companies, can navigate that, I just wanted to start by understanding a little bit of how you got into this field. How did you get into this niche field of food? Because you cover food, cosmetics, healthcare. How did you get into this niche to begin with?
I think I'm a very lucky guy. Went back to the 2009, and when I was in the law school, and the food law professors, Michael Roberts from UCLA, and he gave us the lectures and inspired me to explore the food law areas. And at that time, melamine case was very popular, and it alerted the Chinese consumer, alerted the Chinese government. China issued its first food safety law in 2009. So I'm basically like the first batch of the food law attorneys. So I think I'm a lucky guy. And at that time, China had an FDA. Now we have a new name when combining the different legal authority together. We have a new Administration of Market Regulation. We call it AMR. But, the both food, agriculture, cosmetic, and drug are all under the FDA's authorities. So I think it's a very niche area. And in the 2011, I joined China's first food law and policy think tank. And so the Director General of Shanghai FDA was our chairman, and very prestigious food law professors. It was my colleague. I have to say that like the pioneer in this area, and it's the society gave me this opportunity.
First generation of Chinese food lawyers. So I know we joke about you're younger than I am just by a hair, and I still consider myself young, or at least that's what I am. As I approach 40, that's what I tell myself. But yeah, I think I think it's incredible that even at this stage in your career that you've established yourself as such an expert in this area of law. But to go even deeper into it, I feel like you're not only an expert or you're specialized in this branch of the law, but also you have an additional, I think, I don't know if you call it specialty or a talent, but you have an ability to work with foreign companies in a very constructive way. How did you decide to really focus on helping these foreign companies navigate the China market, which, let's be real, it can be complex?
Yeah, they have the needs. They need to find a food law attorney in China. At that time, it's very hard to find a real food law attorney. Then the only source for them the U.S. law firms, but they don't have the Chinese food law attorneys. So it is my opportunity. And so I'm very lucky that just like you said, the law professors recommended me. For the U.S., we have Michael Roberts. For the EU, we have the Professor Ferdinando Absini, who is the chairman of the Food Law Association. And also, I have the law professors from the Beijing, the Renmin University, and the Shanghai. We have the Jiaotong and the ECOS University who recommended me and my expertise, my skills, and also my firm. So, so it's given me the opportunity to provide services to those international companies. And also, I gave some lectures and webinars to the international clients and potential clients, and they approached me. And so it's very interesting that I have the webinar, and my audience would be the people from the different function teams, from the in-house lawyer, from the regulatory person, the government affairs person. And I understand food law is different. We need to provide, to satisfy the different function teams' needs. And we need to combine the legal tour, science tour, and the government community short tours together. Then we can be a problem solver, not just a lawyer who can write the longer emails. So I think this also is my mentor told me that you should be a problem solver and not be a regular lawyer. That is why your client can trust you, can be helpful.
That it's not just about writing long emails. I'm sure your clients appreciate that as I would. I wanted to pull out one thing that you mentioned there. You talked about how when you talk to your clients, you're not just talking to the chief legal counsel or the legal team. You're talking to the corporate affairs team. You're talking to the government affairs. You're talking to different aspects of the business. And I think that gets to, certainly in any market, all those different departments need to work together. But I feel like in China, it's especially important. And that gets to some of the complexity of the China market. If you could speak to why is this so complex for foreign companies? Is it because it's so different from their home markets? Is it structurally complex? What makes it complex? But also, what makes it rewarding? Because obviously, even with some political issues that are hanging out there, companies are still wanting to do business and commerce is still continuing with China and in China. So what makes it complex, but also what makes it so rewarding for these companies?
Okay, I want to first about the rewarding is because you can make money from the China markets, right? And it's the population, the growing middle class, and who wants high quality food. And the foreigner brands, they can provide the high quality food. And also, China is a country with well-established logistic infrastructure, and you always can find the service providers and the vendors to help you. You don't need to source from other countries. China has everything, basically. The third thing I think is like we have a various ways of PR, marketing, and advertising. So even you enter into this market late, you always have the opportunity to be successful. This is why China is a rewarding market, and there are many, many cases to prove that the foreigner business, foreigner brands, they can be very successful in China markets. And for the complex, I think China is facing the same issue like the U.S. have the federal system and the state law system. China is not a federal country, but we still should consider how to make the laws and the law implementation consistent at the state and the local level. It is a common issue for all the big countries. And secondly is that the law implementation and interpretation, the power differs to the government agencies. So how to communicate to them, how to convince them, you need the legal professionals. And the third thing, I think they are facing the challengers from the local brands. The local brands are quick learners. They know how to copy, and they one successful after another, and their retailer price is very, very low. The US, EU, and they find it very hard to compete. And sometimes they even sell the patriotism to the Chinese consumers. So you are facing the challenges from the local brands. And I see the fourth thing is about the geopolitics. It's like the China, US, China, Japan. They have some, the tariff issues, the countries' relationship issues. So this is another challenger for the foreigner brands. So this is why they make China is a rewarding place. People want to invest because you can make a fortune here. But also you are facing the challengers. You need the professionals to assist you.
I think you raised an interesting point there. And it's something that I saw certainly when I lived and worked in China. I feel like, and obviously in reality, they weren't overnight successes. There was a lot of work that went into building those companies, but there seemed to be so many companies or products, brands that just really in a short period of time, really just gained mass adoption or really caught on. And I always felt like the Chinese consumer, more than any consumer market that I have experienced, is really welcoming of new ideas and new products. So again, that's good. And it can be bad if you're the competition, right? But I think that goes to the reward of the China market. Well, next, you mentioned, to pick out another piece of what you talked about just now, how the regulatory system, you likened it to the United States with the federal system and then, of course, state and local. Can you, for our audience, just really quickly give us a survey of the main regulatory bodies in China and then help us further, especially for those perhaps in the United States, Canada, Europe, how those different regulatory bodies, I know it's not going to be a perfect match, but how those are similar or dissimilar to their own regulatory bodies in their home countries?
Yeah, okay. It's a very excellent question for the audience who are not familiar with the China's regulatory system. I think the same thing is that China also has the lawmakers and the enforcement agency. It is the same. But the different thing is that firstly, China has a very big administration of market regulation that we call the AMR. It's just like you put US FDA, US Patent Trademark Office, and some function teams went together. This agency is supervising food safety, quality, food fraud, and consumer protection, and advertising and marketing, trademark, patent, antitrust, almost everything. This is the most important agency you should work with, and for the foreigner manufacturers or traders. And the second important agency, I think, is the China customers. And this is quite similar to the US system. But in China, the difference is the AMR, because it receives the fundings from the local government. So they shouldn't listen to the local government, at the same time listen to Beijing. But for the customers, they receive the funding from the Beijing. So they defer to the Beijing's decision. It's different. And we also have the Ministry of Agriculture in China. It's quite similar to USDA, but USDA have more staffs in the local office to inspect the agriculture products. But in China, the China Ministry of Agriculture, they rely on the AMR, the FDA, to help them to inspect the safety and the quality of the agriculture products. We also have another lawmakers, is the China National Health Committee. They have a risk management center who is helping to evaluate and draft the food safety standards. In China, we have the law class action system. US have a very strong law class action system, but we basically never use it. It's a good thing for the foreign US companies or EU company to know that China has a class action, but basically never use it. So you will see a lot of single cases of a consumer complainants. In China, it's very cheap to make a consumer complaints or file legal actions against the food companies. So that is why you will see a lot of those complainants or cases. And another thing I think is about it, we have a food recall, US have a food recall, but we also have the same thing is we have different levels of food recall. But in China, sometimes even not a food safety issue can cause a food recall. This is you must be alert and you must be very cautious with that. And we have a professional consumer. In the US, you don't have a professional consumer. In China, we have a group of consumers who make a living by seeking for the safety and the quality problems in the market. And they want to settle with the food companies and to get compensated. They make a living for that. So this group of people, you only can see those people in China, not in the United States. So I think this is basically an overview. I want to compare and share what is similar between US, EU, and China, and what is the difference between the.
I'm glad that you mentioned professional consumers. I think that's a phenomenon, if I can call it that. If you're a foreign company or a business leader and you're not familiar with that, I think it's a very strange something, but it can be very costly. It's in the name, professional, but that's their job almost. And they make a living off of just going into stores and finding, expired product? What are some of the other things that they can file complaints about? It's like expired products, mislabelings. That's the most of it, correct?
Yes, because testing or finding a food safety problem is too expensive to them. So labeling and marketing language, and it's very easy for them to identify. We call them professional in a negative way because they are making a living depending on those things. And for dealing with a professional consumer, it's different as an AMR office. They have the different treatments with them. In Beijing, they see the positive part about this professional consumer is that they find some problems. They protect the consumer's interest. At least they find some problems. And in Shanghai, the FDA will refuse to settle with those professional consumers, so they can never grow. So even if sometimes food companies they want to settle, it's very difficult because FDA does not encourage you to settle. And in the southern China, they sometimes just sue this professional consumer for blackmailing. And so even if sometimes they are asking for lower than 10 times, they can possibly blackmailing. So I see the different Northern China, Eastern China, and South China, they treat the professional consumers differently.
Yes, the consumer needs protection, but sometimes these things add more distortion into the system than they actually create something that's constructive.
Yeah.
So we could go on about professional consumers because there's so many crazy stories, and I heard so many wild anecdotes about them while I was over in China. I'm sure you have insane. Well, I know you have some really crazy stories, but to keep this from being a 3-hour conversation, we'll continue to move on. But before we do, let's recap the different regulatory bodies as far as what you see as their relevance to foreign companies when they're contemplating entering the market. I believe you said the first was SAMR, correct? The State Administration for Market Regulation. Then we had Customs, correct?
Yeah.
And then Ministry of Agriculture. And then you mentioned others like the National Health Committee and their risk assessment group. Is that a fair recap?
Yeah, this is basically the standard makers and the regulation makers and also the enforcement agencies. You can also talk about like the Chinese Congress is as a lawmaker, but China only have the food safety law, and so they involve a little bit. And also you can talk about we have the courtroom, we have the prosecutor, but it's basically the same and you don't work with them frequently. So I didn't mention about the judicial part or the Congress part.
we've set the stage a little bit, talking about these regulatory bodies. You've teased the audience, talking about some of the complexities of the China market and the reward. What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions these foreign companies have about doing business in China?
I think from my experience, okay, and someone think they were successful in other overseas markets and they can be successful in China. It is a major misconception, but China is very special. You have to know how to be localized here, and then you can get successful here. And secondly, is they have a stereotype. The Western people have a stereotype, maybe because of the media. They have a stereotype like China is lack of transparency in its legal system, and there are a lot of selective enforcement. It's true, but the China is also improving. And you just need to find the right person to help you to advocate. We also want the countries to follow the law. And the third thing is people told me that they just want to avoid communication with or keep distance with the regulators so that the regulators will never find them. And I think it's very wrong. When you really have a crisis or really face a law violation, possible law violation, do you think it's a more when the FDA impose a penalty on a stranger, do you think it's more serious or impose on a person who is more familiar with? So I would tell them exchange the knowledge with a regulator, let them know your products, know your brand, and then it will be it's more safer than you just avoid talking to them. Sometimes you avoid talking to them just to make your regulators more worried about you. I think this is the three misconceptions I can think of.
I think that third one's huge. Companies new to the China market, or even those who are in the market, but perhaps could do a better job of managing their positioning in the market. Just too many times I encounter companies who wanted to distance themselves. Anytime that they had to interact with regulators, it was like, please don't hurt me. And it seemed like the companies who really thrived were those who could have a conversation with regulators that was constructive and open. And again, getting the regulators to understand their products and understanding the vision, the strategy, and the development plans of the company. So time and time again, where that really helped. With that, then, what are some hurdles that you've seen companies repeatedly underestimate?
Yeah, I think first thing is just like I said, although we are not a federal, China is not a federal country, but we still face a very huge problem about the scattered regulation and policy documents and among the different government agencies at the state and local level. So when you see maybe a legal document issued by the SAMR, but at the local office, their law implementation is very different, and the foreign business should not be surprised. And the second thing I think is that, U.S. has a very strong free speech, but China does not have that. So when you do the labeling, the marketing, and even in your consumer education materials, the Western people, they think when we have a solid science-based and it is U.S. FDA approved claim, and they can use it in the Chinese marketing materials. No, it's not that easy. And you should evaluate, review, have a proper legal review with your languages. The third thing I think is Western people, and we think that the online regulation should be more lax than the offline regulations, because online offline is more conventional. But now actually China FDA is an AMR. Sometimes they shift the focus on the online regulation. Sometimes they shift the focus on offline regulation. It's about their policy. So you can't be too callous about the online sales and marketing.
Can you give us some stories where companies did, or some anecdotes where companies did engage with regulators and got a deeper understanding of the regulatory environment and how that was a tailwind for their business?
Yeah. Okay. I can't name the client, but once we have a client who just has a translation mistake with the food name, and for the food name, this translation is provided by its Chinese trader, not by the U.S. manufacturers. But it became a food fraud case in China because people think it's like the U.S. business intentionally mislead the consumers, Chinese consumers. So that is why they use an incorrect, inaccurate name. And so they are facing their reputation is destroyed. And actually, this is the U.S. headquarters knows nothing about this translation of this Chinese name. They never make that. They are just quote and borrowed from their Chinese traders. And when we step in and their vice president of regulatory affairs step in and we engage the regulator from the Ministry of Commerce and AMR, and we help them to win all the consumer complaints and we have all the winning court rulings. And so eventually they saved their brand, they saved their reputations. And so it's a very minor translation mistake because at the very first beginning, they just think it's a low risk. They don't need to engage the regulators or the food law attorneys. And eventually it leads to I think it substantially impacts their sales volumes in China in those years. And for the successful case, I think I have a client whose products is sold as a drug in the EU market, but they can't register as a drug in China. So they want to market their product as a cosmetic products. So we help them. We help them with ingredients and marketing, their packaging, and now they have been very successful as a cosmetic products in China. And also we stop the bleaching on the nuts. China has bleaching to whiten the nuts for many years. And, our intention is, of course, we want to protect our clients because our client provides a very high quality nuts. And the client also wants us to help the Chinese consumers because bleaching will hurt the Chinese consumers. So what really matters to our clients, what really matters to the Chinese government, the regulator, is how to protect the Chinese consumers. So we make this case as a consumer protection case, and then we revise the standards. And now China stops prohibit the using of the food processing aid to bleach the nuts or bleach other products. It's a food fraud. I think for some of my clients, when they have a crisis, they use too much PR statements to save their brand. But they should think about how to win the cases, how to win the complaints, because it's very clear that they are innocent. They are not making the mistakes. Use lawyer as your strategy to also in the crisis management to save your brand. It's also very important, not just to make the statements on your website.
Sounds like they probably have a big retainer with a PR agency that's being abused. I said that, not you. A joke there, but I saw cases of, like you said, where companies, they thought that it was more a battle of public opinion than actually engaging with regulators and clearing the legal hurdles first. So I think that's a good call out. Going back to some of what you mentioned in the intro, when you talked about how you got into this niche of law, can you let's revisit that a little bit. And can you tell us how food law in China has developed? And I know that, again, we could spend an entire podcast on just that topic, but briefly, could you tell us how things have evolved over the past 5 years as it relates to pharma cosmetics?
Okay. And I think there is a learning curve for the Chinese regulators because we only have the first food law is issued in 2009. Unlike the US, you have over 100 years of the food law involvement, but China has is a very short history of the food law, but we face all the legal food law issues US and the EU people are facing, right? So we want the source management, but we can't really fly to the US plant, EU plant to do an on-site inspection. So you will see we have the more filing requirement on the US manufacturers, and like the Decree 248 about the overseas manufacturers registration. And this is a new requirement for the US manufacturers. And the major legal responsibility is still on the Chinese trader, importer, and the distributors. So the US business, you should not be fooled if your local Chinese partner tells you that because you manufacture, you produce the product, so you are taking the primary responsibility. No, it's still on the Chinese importer and the trader distributors, because this is easy for the China AMR customers to catch because they're based in China, right? And when they import the products to China, they should be responsible. And so the second, I think, food safety, you heard about food safety, but food safety is improving substantially in China. So there are not so many food safety cases in China. So the SAMR, they realize they should shift some of their resources to the food fraud and the forced advertising, anti-competition, and food sustainabilities, and a lot of emergent or new issues. And now I find the focus on the soft advertising, because some people, they are taking the legal loophole on using the marketing and the PR or education. So they said the consumer education to actually they are doing the food advertising. So China SAMR wants to fix this legal loophole. And so they shift some resource on that in the past 5 years.
Can you go into a little bit that like false advertising piece of it?
For example, conventional food, according to the Chinese law, you can't make any health claim because if it's a conventional food, it's not a dietary supplement or it's not a drug. So you can't. But how they use, maybe they use a trade association. Maybe they register WeChat public account and they publish a lot of science papers. Those science papers indirectly just indicates that you have a lot of health benefit by consuming cranberry, by consuming nuts, by consuming what. So so this is a gray area. Whether this material is for consumer education or whether they are advertising, especially for a company or for a trade association who have a very huge market share, the SAMR will evaluate and determine whether they are advertising. So this is, I think, in the past 5 years, we have seen a lot of cases, about regulating those on the social media, regulating those science papers posted on the TikTok and posted on the WeChat, and they have a basis. Whether a conventional food, they can serve the same function as a health food, as a drug, right? And this is so it's a very controversial issue.
I think it's safe to say that we're struggling with some of that here in the United States. Anybody who picks up a supplement or a health food, and we'll see a claim, and sometimes we'll see a little asterisk, and then see down that there's a very small print, covering themselves from a legal perspective. But yeah, I think everybody, just about every market around the world, especially as consumers, are wanting to eat healthier and have more functionality out of their food. We're all struggling with that.
Yes. And in US, you also have the First Amendment. So you can argue with free speech or using with the advertising law, free speech versus constitution right versus advertising. But in China, we don't have those constitutional. We have the free speech in the constitutional law, but we can't sue with as a free speech as a legal reason. So that is why the advertising law became more and more powerful.
So Edison, you mentioned that you work with companies from around the globe, all trying to navigate the China market. I would be really curious to hear how perhaps an American company, a European company approaches the complexities of the market differently than, say, a Japanese or a Korean company.
Okay. I think it's very different. For the U.S. companies and EU companies, they are very proud about their practices. And when they argue with the Chinese regulators, they always use the international practice and what is our standard. But for the Korean, Japanese companies, they are very humbled. They defer to the Chinese laws and regulations. They will never argue with their domestic laws. And for the culture difference, I have Japanese clients who just give some cosmetic samples to the regulators. They think it's Asian culture and it's a small gift of our product. It's a sample. But the U.S. companies will never do that due to the FCPA concerns. The third thing is they have the different understandings with the geopolitics. The Korea, Japanese company, Australian companies, they will think they are less risky, as they are more safer because they will not be impacted by the politics. But the reality is that when Chinese regulators, they are dealing with the U.S. companies, they will be more careful. So they have the misconception. And the four things I can say is that when you make a decision, I find the US company and EU companies, they make a decision much faster than the Japanese clients. And for the government relationship, the Japanese and the Korean companies, they more focus on the local level. So the legal authority who actually day-to-day regulate, supervise them. And for the US and the EU company, they will focus on both the state and local levels. They will use their embassy or the Chamber of Commerce to lobby or influence the regulator at the state level. This is another major difference.
Interesting. And so, not to make you nervous, but which methods do you think are more effective in China? You mentioned several different areas where Western companies or, say, US European companies take a different approach than the other East Asian countries. Which methodologies do you think are more effective in the China market?
I would like the US style, I think. And this is not just because US companies.
You're just saying that because I'm an American?
No, and it's not because I have most of my clients a U.S. company, and the U.S. companies they tend to invest more money in the law compliance. It's about they are more open-minded to exchange the knowledge with the Chinese regulators. But for Japanese, Koreans, sometimes their leaders just hide their feelings. So I think it's a different cultures. Also, for the Chinese regulators, they are more interested to hear about the U.S. standard, the EU standards. They think those are called the international practices. So my observation is that I think U.S. style is more effective if they can be, they can take in learning some from the Asian culture about the Asian country. Yeah, so I think the Japanese company, Korean companies, they are more localized. They are more localized. But the U.S. company, EU companies, they were more international.
This idea of engaging central government versus engaging local government. I know when I was working in China, this was an ongoing conversation of what's the balance between the two. And everybody has finite resources and time. How do you balance the two? So what's your thoughts on that? And is it a hybrid of the two, or is one more effective than the other?
I think if you want to build a trust and build your reputation, you should work with a state government. They cannot really help you with a specific case. But in the press release, you will find you have your social responsibility and you are willing to work with the Chinese regulators when you work with a state, with SAMR, China Customs at state level. And also, when you are facing with a tariff case, you must work with the legal authority at state level. And when you have the specific cases, I think more important that you're working with the local level. They have the jurisdiction over your company, and the government agency at the state level can help you. I think I can't say which one is important, but I can tell you that it depends on what case and the crisis and the problem you need to resolve.
Okay, so to me, what I hear is if you're doing government relations in China, or you're the head of regulatory affairs, you have to be both in Beijing and you need to be local wherever you're operating. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, it's fair to say when you are from Walmart, because Walmart is a big brand. The Beijing relationship is also very important to Walmart to build your image. But for some middle-sized U.S. manufacturer traders, they don't want to be high profile. So there more resources should be invested in the local government. This is more important. And Shanghai has a very unique role is that Shanghai embraces innovation. And when you have some new system, you want to have a trial, and China is willing to have it start with Shanghai. And so, in the food law area, you also have innovation. You also have imitation food, and you also have the plant-based meat, GMO. And if you want to have some innovation, you can start with Shanghai. Yeah.
Okay.
But I agree that if you have the manufacturing sites in other provinces, you should have a build trust with the local government agencies. I agree with that.
What part does that cultural understanding and also understand that cultural nuance that comes through language, what role does that play in being able to navigate the regulatory space there in China?
Yeah, I think it's important the way you have your language skill and you share the same culture. And I was working in both the U.S. law firm, the Chinese law firms. The culture is different, and I was teaching in the two U.S. law schools. So I think my experience gave me a lot of valuable experience. Tells me how culture and language plays an important role in my career. And an ideal lawyer, you should understand when I always want to explore the legal values behind the articles of the law. And I want to involve in the lawmaking, and I want to understand the law implementation. And I should have my language skill, and I should have my cultural background that I can build a trust with the regulators and the lawmakers. They can share valuable, helpful information with me. They can tell me the truth. And even when we speak the Shanghai dialogue, it can make people feel closer, right? And I think no one will deny that culture, history, norm, value can shape its legal systems. And people will listen to you, but will not listen to you if you don't understand their cultures. For example, sometimes the culture is very important in the case, like Chinese consumers they eat organs, but most Americans they don't eat organs. So Chinese consumer will care more about hormone. But so this can become a very important issue when you're in a legal case. So the culture can shape the law, and I think it's even the food law is a product to the.
That just reminds me how in so many areas of life and in business, it's the things that you don't know that will get you, right? Well, we've talked about cultural exchange, and I guess to wrap that up, I'm interested in you've talked about your mentors and you've talked about your time working with some different universities globally and even lecturing globally. What role do you think foreign universities and legal professionals can continue to play in China?
I think academia work is very difficult, but the good thing is that they can make you think. The good thing for the law professor is that they give you a lot of questions, and these questions are very valuable, but maybe they even don't know the answer. They just make you think. And I attend like the UCLA, Harvard, the law seminars, and they're top talents, top food law professors in the globe. They have a lot of interesting topics. And I think the law school students, if they want to write a paper, they just it's a law professor just to give you a good topics. So, in the China, the lawyers, they have a very limited role in the lobby or influence the lawmakers of the government agencies. But the foreign law professors and the Chinese law professors, they have a very neutral role because their purpose is how to improve the legal system, how to protect the consumers. They don't advocate for a food company or a food trade association. I think working with the law professors, one thing is that they help me to understand the international practice. What is the emergent area? What is the future? And what is the regulatory trends? And at the same time, when myself or my clients need some neutral role from them to provide some objective observation about the food law, I can use those resources and help my clients. So I think law professors in the US, EU, or Chinese law schools are very important to my business.
That's great. And then obviously you maintain relationships with, I think we've already talked about UCLA, and you also within Europe, correct?
Yes. And the Professor Absini is chairman of the Food Law Association there, and he is an Italian. And so we maintain a relationship. We attend their conferences, and we are doing the comparative law analysis with them. So this is also helpful.
I think that's great insights and also great opportunities to go to Italy, which is never a hardship. Before we go too much further, I want to also keep giving the audience some practical takeaways from this discussion, other than that they need to have a good plan before entering the China market and make sure that they're surrounded by the right expertise. But to give them some nuggets, takeaways from this conversation, some immediate things that they can use. If you were advising a CEO of a foreign company that's entering China for the first time, what would be the one piece of advice? And maybe if it's something that's a little less conventional, the better. But what's one thing that you would advise them to do?
And I assume the CEO, most of the CEO are from the business department, okay? And
Yeah.
I think there's a conquering their legal and regulatory trade barrier is as important as they have a great business plan in China. So I will advise and alert the CEOs, you should have the precautionary approach and to deal with the legal and the regulatory barriers when you want to enter into a new market.
All the marketing in the world won't help you if you can't even get into the market, right? Building on that, what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes that companies that make that cost them? It's not just about money, but it's also about time. Because I think we've both seen cases where companies opened up exploratory offices or they sort of had a soft launch into China, or they spent a lot of time before they actually got any traction. So what are some of the biggest things that you see that costs companies not just money, but also time when it comes to, and wasted time when it comes to the China market?
Yeah, I think for the US and the EU companies, before entering into a market, they will spend a lot of time and money on some research reports, or sometimes they evaluation their previous performance. And I think that a very efficient and quick way is that just have the business leader fly to China, talk to the right person, and to have have an overview and have an impression about how the market goes and what is their challenges. And then if they find there's no the obstacles they can't conquer, then they get into the details, not like spending the time and the money on the research reports as their first step.
Some consultants hate us after this. So it's not just about going and commissioning a bunch of consultant reports, market reports.
Yeah, they are also important. I just say that maybe they are not the first step. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, I'd agree. And as a consultant myself, that's not to dissuade people from never using consultants, but to use them judiciously, right? Use them prudently. Up to this point, we've talked a lot about the current state of the regulatory environment in China and also the current business environment that your clients and other foreign companies are facing in China. Let's look a little ahead at both the regulatory environment. What trends do you see evolving over the next 5 years, as well as how do you see the overall business environment evolving in the short term?
For the regulatory environment, I think from the 2009 to now, China already we have passed the learning curve for the issuing a lot of food regulation and standards. Now we just want to make them as a system. So I don't anticipate there will a lot of new law to be issued. But the law enforcement will be different because the legal authority, they have more experience on how to handle the different cases. So you should focus on the law implementation. And the second thing is that, now the food safety is always a priority, but, there are not so many food safety cases now in China. So the food fraud and forced advertising becomes more and more important on the local AMRs will become their focus. I think it's for the food fraud and forced advertising.
And you see that for the foreseeable future, or for at least the short term. What do you think about the more broadly speaking, the business environment for food, pharma, cosmetics, and healthcare companies in China? And specifically, let me go further and say specifically for multinationals.
Okay. And I'm very positive because I'm in the food and the drug industry. People, when we have a more and more middle class, they still, maybe they save money on their clothes, but they would like to pay, they would like to pay for the much healthy, the food and the agriculture and the health products, the drug products. And especially I'm positive with the food and agriculture products because people see the values, and the Chinese consumer have a strong need for the high quality food and agriculture products. China needs multinational. We need their investment, their employment, their technology. So they're always an open door to the multinational corporations. And I think there is huge opportunity for middle-sized, international investors who wants to enter the China market. Maybe they can start with a trade or they can start with a small business to test the water. And then there will always have the opportunities for them. I still see the major challenges about the geopolitics. But I think when the government, the two countries to the government, they disagree with each other, we need the non-government channels to ease the tensions. China is, is facing a slower economic growth because because of the more and more Asian society, and also our GDP is already huge. But I think the impact on the high quality food and agricultural products and the drug is very limited because it's a middle class who wants to pay. But maybe cosmetic is challenging because some people think they can save money on the cosmetic products.
I certainly save money on my cosmetics products. Bad jokes aside. So is that where you see really the biggest opportunity for multinationals, is more on that more premium side of food?
Yeah, and I think on the premium side, the high end brand, and for the cheap market, you can't compete with a Chinese local brand on their price. So what I think for the multinational corporation, their competition should be focused on their quality, not on the price. So I think for the future market, the Chinese consumers, they were not to buy a product who only have a story. They want to pay for the quality, they want to pay for the price. So either you are high quality, either you are cheap enough. Otherwise, you will lose the business.
Again, I see some parallels here with at least some of the trends that I'm look at in the United States. Before we close here, again, I want to lead the audience with some really practical takeaways. And you mentioned in your comments just now that it's not only the large companies entering the China market, that there's opportunities for small and medium-sized companies. So let's put ourselves in the shoes of one of those CEOs who's maybe not in a huge multinational, but still they're looking for opportunities overseas. What would be they feel overwhelmed when considering the China market. What would be, and again, we're just keeping this within the food, pharma, cosmetics, and healthcare space. What would be some of their first steps that you would advise them to take before they make that initial investment in the market?
If they feel overwhelmed, I think the first thing I should do is to tell him to not pressure himself too much. And sometimes, he's too worried, and sometimes it's just his imagination. And I will advise him to list the things, the specific issues, because it's his impression that he feels overwhelmed. But when you list the specific things like the challenges and the issues, and I will provide the possible solutions for each of them. And I think that can ease his stress. And then we can get into other details. And the first things, I should make him feel less overwhelmed. And he can know it is a market with opportunity, not just a market with with too much uncertainties. So this is the first thing I should do. It's not just to give him confidence. It's telling him the truth on how to deal with a new market, a very promising market in front of a CEO.
I think anybody listening to this conversation, whether they've been in the China market for a long time or they're just contemplating entering the market, I think after our discussion, they should feel less anxious and overwhelmed about the process, or at least know that there are ways to navigate this market, and people have done so successfully. And there's people like you out there that can work with them to do that. So before we close, if somebody does listen to this conversation and wants to get in touch with you, how could they do that? Where can people either reach out to you, follow your work, whether that's on the client business side or what you're doing with academia?
Yeah, they can reach me through my emails, and we also have a website and office line.
When we post this online, I'll make sure to include all your contact information so that anyone who wants to reach out to you, whether it's to say hi or discuss how they can navigate the complexities that we discussed here today, they know how to reach you. Great. Edison, again, thank you so much. I know it's really late there in Shanghai. You've been not only have you been up with us, but you've in a very succinctly given us a breakdown on so many different issues that companies face, especially multinationals, when navigating the market over there. And can't thank you enough for your time.
Thank you, Will, for your time. Thank you for this video and this opportunity. And if you have about a webinar or about other seminar, and I would like to be one of your speakers. And if your clients and the audience wants to talk about how to work with the regulators in a smart way and about the legal regulatory strategies, I'm very happy to discuss with them. Thank you.
Of course. Well, Edison, I hope this is, again, just the first time that we do this. I think that there's much more that we could get into. So I hope you'll join me again for a part 2, and maybe we can take some audience questions even for the next round.
And I'd love to. And it's pro bono. It's free. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not paying anybody else's legal bills here. No.
Right. And also, for any new clients, to me, it's also a learning curve. So I think we can give some free hours and to help them to know me, and I also can pass the learning curve. So this is also what we can offer to the new clients.
Great. If it's all right with you, then I think we talked about this before. If people listening here today reach out and mention this interview, this podcast, that they can receive a free consultation.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. You heard it here. Free consultation. Yeah. Again, thank you, Edison.
Not for too long. Okay.
Of course. Okay. Of course. Hey, thank you. I know you have family there and you have a busy day ahead of you. So thank you so much. Have a good night.